Well, here we are on our usual podcast. This is Ellyn's YouTube channel called the Self-Alignment Channel. Reverend Ellyn Kravette is here, and I'm Laurie Meier. And so, yeah, we're going to dive into some topics today around death. And part of the reason that this has come up is because my wonderful mentor for many, many years in my life, his name was Paul Lowe, and he took his last breath this week. So he went to the other side, and so I had shared with Ellyn how that felt for me because this was the first time I had somebody from in my life that went to the other side that was at such a high level. It felt like he was maybe just going on another adventure. It didn't, I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt sad that he's left and that I would never be able to see him again, but I didn't feel sadness around it. I felt like he would have been very fine with it. And and it was just interesting. So then we started talking about death and we decided it would be really fun to do a little podcast about this.
Right.
So, and his teachings are all based on how can we live at our highest potential. So this all really comes full circle. So, living and dying at our fullest potential.
Well, it brought up, hearing about him and watching the video, and anyone can go on to YouTube and look for Paul Lowe, Lowe, and see some of the really wonderful things that he has to say about paying attention to every word you say, and just the vibration of it, just being absolutely totally alive and living in the moment and dying in the moment. And and I wish he would do another video and let us know what it feels like to be living your full potential,
That's a
dying.
great idea. I
Being
hope he
dead. And
does.
I have a feeling with him that he is so special, he just might do that.
Yeah.
So we'll keep an eye out for it. But it brought up a lot of things for me of uh of things that I think about dying. We were just talking before we did the podcast that dying's been very interesting to me ever since I was a kid, because probably because my father died when I was 5. And I didn't know how to think about it or feel about it. I think I felt like he left me. And then there was a prayer that I heard people say about how you're watched over by those that are gone. And I, being a child, thought that God and my father could watch me every moment of my life, which really scared me a lot because I had no privacy and I just felt I could be watched all the time. And then, when I went to high school, it morphed into somebody else, or something else. When I was reading James Fenimore Cooper, and there was a Native American guide that he had, whose name I'm not even going to bother with because I would definitely mispronounce it. And there was a piece about this Native American always struck me as so in tune with nature. Um and and I remember in this story that when it was time for this Native American to leave, he would just build himself a coffin and lie down and leave, which seemed to me really wonderful. When I grew up a little, I realized who my father was, you know, how we talk about in the Course of Miracles, which is part of my teaching and understanding. Um, and what it says is a miracle is a change of perception. When I grew up a little and understood who my father was, I understood what a gift he gave me by leaving and how instrumental he has always been in my life. Uh, but how him and the body would have not been as kind or as gentle. And so it was a very loving thing that he did to leave when I was a child, and spared a lot of rigidity and spared a lot of stuff that he dealt with in this life, which he didn't have to deal with or could see with greater perception when he passed over. So, um,
So a question here, if
mhm,
I can interrupt for a moment.
sure.
So in the years after your father passed, did you hear him or feel him around you? Did you actually have conversations with him or were you able to connect in any way?
Not until I was 21.
Okay.
And I was really hurting and doing really badly in terms of living to any potential. And one day just screamed out for him to help me. And that's when he came back into my life to a point where I could communicate with him and feel his presence, which I do to this day.
And can you
Uh,
connect at will?
hmm?
Can you can you at will make a connection with him now? So if
Oh,
you
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so grateful for passing over because so many people in this life are stuck in various waves because of various crises or misconceptions. And I think, you know, that's why the group that we have and so many groups are on earth that people form to get rid of misperceptions and you know try to clear it out a little, and when they clear it out a little they become peaceful and more integrated into themselves and who we really are and what we're really doing here.
Mm.
When we learn that it is not the world telling us who to be, but we need to get centered and grounded so that we can allow ourselves to be the light that we came in to be, uh, and and to understand that we're all one, but we have to have our experiences to learn and to grow and to teach compassion for ourselves and others, um, and not be caught up with the values of the materialistic world, but to understand that the value is in who we are, which is where we're all going, which is what we came here to learn and what we came here to teach. I the other day it struck me and I put on, you know, how you put a little something on your signature on your email, and I decided it was time for a new one. But what I put on was, you know, we're all teachers and we're all students. We're students by what we watch and what we listen to and what we hear, and we're teachers by what we do and other people watch and listen to and hear. So that's very, very important to understand that teachers and students are one and the same, which is what we're doing at the moment. You know, in our group, we read different books, and right now we're looking at the ACIM, the Course in Miracles for Teachers. And that's exactly what it tells us, is that teachers are students and students are teachers. So, we are talking today about leaving this planet and what we're leaving behind, and it's very tied up in why we came in the first place. Uh, and and to leave our imprint, to leave our energy, to leave the potential for learning and growing, and to let other people know that they can do it too. One of my favorite teachers has been Richard Bach, who wrote a series of books, but one of the wonderful books he wrote is A Bridge Across Forever.
But
And
Jonathan Livingston Seagull as well, right?
Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and one of my favorites, what I consider one of my many Bibles, is Illusions, Memoirs of a Reluctant Messiah.
Mm.
And what he says is let me get this right. It was one of those things that I don't know if any of you out there listening to this podcast have ever tried this kind of teaching yourself experience, but many years ago, I used to write things on the bathroom mirror. And after a while, you don't even realize that you are looking at it every morning, but it becomes a part of you. And this is one of the things I wrote down, and I was teaching at the time, and it was learning is allowing yourself to know what you already know because it connects in you. And doing is demonstrating that you know it. And teaching is allowing other people to know that they know it too. So that's one of the quotes from Illusions.
Mm-hmm.
And that became very clear to me in so many different avenues of my life, in teaching, but also in ministry. And we were talking about Egypt the other night, and
Yeah.
and saying to myself, what kind of a priest are you going to be this time? Are you going to be the kind of priest that scares people and puts yourself on a pedestal? Or are you the kind of priest this time to let other people know that there are no pedestals, that we're all one? And that, is what every religion in the world starts out by saying, there's only one, and we're all a part of it. And then when you start separating yourself from everybody else and collecting money and being on a pedestal and thinking people should support you and that you know more than they do, instead of learning from them continually and being a part of them and celebrating them, which is really what priesthood should be about. It should be about celebration. Celebration of life, celebration of who we are, celebration of the spirit that flows through us all. So what does this have to do with dying? Has to do with the great lesson that there is no dying. There is a giving up of the flesh. But if I'm still talking to my father who died in 1948, there is no death. If I'm still talking to Jesus Christ, who died in probably the year 11 of the calendar that we use, there is no death. If I'm still talking to my mother who died in 2020, and my brother, who I don't even know the year anymore because there's no such thing as time and there's no such thing as separation. But what there is the soul saying, yes, I agree to go to this planet at this time, and I will do what you sent me to do. And I don't have to know what it is, and I will have the experiences I need to have in order to grow and learn, and I'll touch who I need to touch, and I trust what sent me here. I trust my holy agreement that there is a need for me to be here at this time and to be who I am, and however I am, use me. And when it's time for me to rest, I'll figure out the next piece when I get to the next piece. Sometimes we're obsessed with death because we want to control everything, and it's something that we don't know for sure. And we want to know, so we make up stuff so that we'll know. And at some point in our maturity, we get to understand that we don't know and we don't need to. But there is a communication that we can avail ourselves to, not about the future, but about love in the presence, about being fuller in the present. I used to want to know things so I could control more. And then you get to a point of not knowing, but trusting. Laurie, what were you going to say?
There's a lot of stuff in there that you just said. It's fantastic. So I guess the one question would be, when you're talking about communicating, are you talking about communicating with the source, communicating with what people might call God, and then following that guidance and trusting that? Is that what you mean by that?
What I'm saying is there is only the source.
Mhm.
There's nothing but the source. You can't have one and something else.
So most of us are going through our lives and we think we're making all of those decisions ourselves. We think we know best and we'll figure it out. And so what I hear you saying, and what A Course in Miracles is saying, is about trusting the guidance from inside of us, trusting that connection with Source, and following that takes us sometimes on a path that's very different, but has the ability to solve problems that we do not have the ability to solve. So maybe, I guess that's, the question was kind of around, okay, communicating with Source. Now, most of us are not doing that. And so are we talking about we need to meditate? Are we talking about we need to get more in touch with our feelings and our heart?
It's interesting. I think there's no path. I think every individual in this journey has their own path. I don't think I think your path is your path, my path is my path. For me, I have always imagined a cartoon with some kind of a man, a strong man, maybe like little Abner, grabbing me by my pants, carrying me along, kicking and screaming, and knowing that we were going to get there, wherever there is. And then I finally learned not to kick and scream. I just always thought God's carrying me. And I used to call myself God's ADD child, God's attention deficit. I'm not going to sit and meditate. I have tried to meditate. I go to sleep. But I know that however we are and whoever we are and whatever we are, that force comes to us. I was reading today something about what was her name? That woman that used to walk for peace. The
Oh, Mother
peace,
Teresa.
huh?
Mother Teresa? Walking for Peace?
No, she would walk for peace.
Oh,
The Peace Pilgrim, her name was. She
okay.
was called the Peace Pilgrim. She had no belongings. If you saw the movie Forrest Gump,
Oh,
and you see he's following this woman who's walking with a crowd of people, that was the Peace Pilgrim. And she just walked over the country. She had nothing except an apron with some pockets in it that she made herself. And what she said is she's walking for peace. Sometimes people joined her, sometimes she walked alone, sometimes she would get arrested for being a vagrant.
wow.
And it didn't make a difference to her. Because if she was in jail, she was sure there was somebody in jail she needed to talk to. And if she was walking, she was sure there was somebody along the road she needed to talk to.
Now
If
that's
she
full trust.
slept under a tree, she just trusted. And I remember one of the stories that there was on the walk is that she met a man that gave her some shelter for the night. And in the morning, he said to her, I meant harm to you, and I could not touch you. She was shrouded in the peace that she believed in, that she knew was there. There are some things we know, and we've said this in the group too. We have a wonderful group on Monday nights, and we would like to start other groups. Groups are a wonderful way of learning from each other. And there is no, and learning, there's no separation. People come from different paths, but we get together and you realize there's no separation. But in any event, we were talking in the group about sometimes in life, and if everyone listening to this podcast could hear that, sometimes in life, something you've made a choice that you didn't even think about. And it ended up being really, really a turning point in your life. But you had this incredible sense of knowing. Sometimes you can be angry, you can be a million different kinds of feelings and thoughts and whatever. And out of the blue comes a sense of knowing this is true. There's no reaction to it. There's no good or bad. It's just true. And whatever it is, you just do it. And it may be a little kind of a thing. It may be a smile at somebody. Like, I don't know why I smiled at that person, and I'll never see them again as long as I live. But sometimes there are these moments in life where you say to yourself, I just had a conversation with somebody. Could have been one sentence, could have been an hour, could have been a day. And you think, if I had to go through everything I've lived through to be in this one moment with this person at this time, this is why I came. It could be fleeting, it could be a second.
Mhm.
If you never knew yourself to be kind, if you always knew yourself to be somebody that said, me first. I had a friend once, she would say, you first after me. If you were somebody that has always been worried about, am I going to have enough? And then you have for a fleeting second this act of kindness, and you say, I don't know why the hell I did that. I'm not a kind person, but this is why I came. Perhaps that's really true.
I
So
feel
the answer to the question is, everybody is different. There's not a method for all of us. But all of us, there's a prayer of Cardinal Newman, one of my favorite prayers, and it says, "In my sickness, use me. However I am, use me for your greater good."
So, I mean, I guess I want to go back to the idea of trust and really kind of getting to the point where, for the people that say, I have no idea. I mean, once in a while, and it's very rare that I have that feeling inside of me that I know that something is right. But for the rest of the time, I'm making all my decisions in my head, and I have a lot of chatter going on in my head, and I'm not connecting anywhere else. And so what do you say to somebody like that? Do you say it's okay, then that's how it is for you in this lifetime? And
Yeah.
we'll
And do you
never-
want more of that?
you might want more of it.
Yeah. Doesn't that feel good to not be concerned with right or wrong? That, and to let go of judgment, to know that every moment is the moment that should be exactly the way it is. And what do you want to do with it?
Oh, right. So what you're saying is don't judge that about having all the thoughts. Just allow that to be. Mhm.
Yeah. When we learn to let go of judgment, I'm sure we've used this analogy on the podcast before, but my favorite story is the story of Adam and Eve, right? We have discussed this ad nauseum, right? But we're discussing it again.
I don't know if we have on the podcast.
No,
Did in the
the
group, but maybe not.
story of Adam and Eve, where they are in paradise.
Yeah.
And isn't that what Jesus said to us? As above, so below. I'm coming to tell you that there's no separation between heaven and earth. So Adam and Eve are living in paradise, and they have everything they want, everything to eat, all the beautiful fruits and flowers and happiness, and they're copulating all over the place, and it feels absolutely lovely. And the animals are all around, and everybody's doing whatever they do, and they live in paradise. And then they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Mhm.
The tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the minute they do that, all of a sudden, good things and evil things, all of a sudden, there's all of this judgment. And what do? They go to the amygdala of the brain, which goes to negative, I'm not safe. And they judge themselves to be ugly. They judge their genitals to be ugly. They hide themselves, judging their humanness. How many of you have heard somebody, makes me crazy, as a matter of fact, but have heard somebody do something wrong and then they say, "Oh, but we're human."
Yeah.
Human means that you have the potential to do everything in a beautiful way. It means you have the potential to do the best that you can.
Maximum potential.
Yeah. But how many people just say, "Oh, I'm human, I fail."
Mhm.
Well, guess what? I'm human, I succeed. But here they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they decided that they were not so hot. It is a matter of what went on in their mind. So they threw themselves out of paradise and made a kind of a hell because of judgment. Why was it different the day before than the day after? The only thing that was different is they started to decide, oh, this is good and I'm not so good and this is ugly and this is pretty. It's all in your mind. I've been talking all week about money because I am in a workplace where people may lose their job. I've been in workplaces before where people have lost their jobs. And we get so frightened that we don't have abundance, but we live in an abundant world. And sometimes we have to lose what we think is important to find out what's really important. I've been working since I was 13 years old. My mother valued work because she was a single mom putting food on the table. We just talked about my father dying when we were 5, and my mother had a standard of living, and it was really important. She worked incredibly hard. And I grew up valuing work and working incredibly hard. So I started working when I was 13 years old. And about 30, 40, maybe time goes so quickly. Years ago, I lost my job. And you could have scraped me off the floor with a spoon. I had no idea who I was if I wasn't my work. I had no idea that I had value if it wasn't the work I did that gave me value.
Mm.
And how was I going to live through that period of time? And I went through what we call the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is where you are down and dark as can possibly be, and still be breathing on this planet. And people got concerned about me. And anyone that would talk to me during that period of time, because I would work on every day, I would work on trying to find a job for me. But people got concerned about me, so they decided to center around me and decided to make my house into a church, which was the beginning of the church that lasted for 16 years.
Wow.
And out of that came my career that I have been practicing now for 30 years.
Wow.
And out of that came this whole new existence. But it taught me to trust the web of life that is the universe. It taught me that I don't know. It taught me to trust. It taught me never to forget the pain of being so frightened that you can't be frightened anymore. It burns it out of you. And one of the things I learned about the workplace is I was afraid to be exactly who I was. I spent a whole lot of my life role playing, which is not being alive. And after that, I began to trust more and trust in who I was and who I came to be. And I said to myself, never forget what this feels like.
Mm.
Never forget that you had no control and that there was a path for you.
Yeah. At the deepest, darkest levels of trust that, or first of all, fear, and then to come to the conclusion of trust is amazing, which makes you an amazing teacher because of that, because you've had that experience.
Exactly. And so that's why I'm saying to you, we don't have to choose our experiences, but we can choose to learn from our experiences,
Yeah.
and that there is no mistake. You know, I have done things that I'm ashamed of, not because I'm human, because I was frightened, because I made more choices that I didn't respect.
Yeah.
And when I learned not to be frightened, I didn't have to make those choices. Taught me compassion.
For ourselves,
Yes.
without having the guilt and the shame, and that probably we all go through that when we realize, ooh, that was not very good what I did.
And to learn to not frighten other people.
Uh-huh.
We are
Meaning,
going through a time in this country which is very scary to a lot of people
yeah, that's in the United States.
in the United States. And to learn not to let it frighten me, to refuse to be frightened. Jesus Christ on the cross refused to be frightened. He knew there was no death.
Right.
But this body is for a reason. It teaches us something. If we listen, if we stop being so busy, we don't listen. So it's so interesting because we started this podcast today that we wanted to talk about death. And what are we talking about? We're talking about living well, dying well,
Yeah.
and listening to it all to see what it teaches us.
Yeah. Tell us about your experience of, or in this past week, you had an experience where you thought you might die.
I
And
did.
and what that was like for you, and maybe what came out of that for you.
Well, it was interesting. I got dizzy, and it was the second time it happened to me. But, you know, whenever anything happens to me, I'm not used to that. And I'm very, what's important to me is that I can take care of myself. And so when I was so uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, I was thinking, is this what dying feels like? Because I'm at an age where it would, you know, my body is still functioning nicely, but parts of it might be wearing out a little bit.
Mhm.
And it it was too uncomfortable to think that this is what dying feels like. But I wasn't sure. I do practice. We were talking about this, about since I told you about my experience in high school, I do practice dying. Sometimes in the morning I wake up and I always do my gratitude in the morning, or almost always do my gratitude in the morning, thinking about things I'm grateful for. And feeling the abundance of my life, the as fortunate as I am, I'm really grateful for. I love an abundant life. I love the trees around me. I love that I have a house where I'm warm. I love that my toes move. I love that my fingers move. I love that I have my eyesight. I love that I have teeth that work. I love a lot of things, and I'm grateful for it. And sometimes in the morning, I can just lie there and not even feel like I have a body. It just, I can't explain it. It's just, it's like melting into, I have this wonderful, comfortable bed. and these sheets that are really soft and gentle. And I just sometimes feel like my body melting into it, thinking this is just lovely. And I'm practicing leaving. And people that know me uh, understand that. And it's not a depression, mind you. I'm not sad about it. I'm just grateful for the life that I've been able to live every day. I know that I only get every day to live, one day at a time. I know that I cannot change the past. I know that there's no sense in being afraid of the future, because if I live in the future or the past, it takes away from the ability and the gratitude of the day. So the object of the exercise is to do whatever I'm called to do that day, to try to improve, to try to learn, to try to live as fully as I possibly can, to try to be kind. I don't always succeed at all those things, mind you, but they're possibilities.
Yeah.
They're possibilities.
But the idea is that we recognize death in order to really live every moment, to really live every day, because we recognize that there's also a death process for the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even though, so this is what I wanted to discuss too. Is so the first time when I first said to you, hey, do you want to do a podcast about death? You said, sure, there is no such thing as death, but the body stops working. But that's not really what you're talking about. You're talking about the spiritual side. So we come into a body and we leave a body. Do you want to talk more about that?
Well, the question is, who are we? What are we?
Yeah.
And for me, I've come to the conclusion that who I am as a human being has to do with my values, with what I value, with what I think. That's who I am.
Mhm.
The the rest of it isn't who I am.
The physical body is not who you are.
Right.
Okay.
And when I think about me, I'm using my mind to think. I believe Jesus talked about between the mind and the heart, there's another part of us. And I believe I've read about um, scientists measuring people who have just passed over and found that there's a little bit of weight that goes.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Believe it's called the new
I'm not sure.
NOUS, something like that. I'm not quite sure. Maybe people can write to us and let us know exactly what it's called. It's not the mind, it's not the body, it's the spirit, and it's a thing. I once had a past life regression. It was my first past life regression. And my brother did it for me. He was quite an incredible creature. And he took me in 7-year increments, and I went past this life and felt this incredible, like blue spark, like just being this spark of energy. We are energy. That's what we really are, is energy, a coming together of energy. But I just felt like this little blue spark. I felt like I was going to another planet. It happened to be Uranus to rest. But it was like just this little spark. It felt so wonderful. It was really hard for me to come back because I'm not thrilled with this body. And it felt so good to be free. And and then I remembered that there was a reason I came and I needed to come back. You asked me before about out of body experiences, and that is the one that I remember because it was so delightful. It was so wonderful. It just makes me want to breathe. That's the only way I can describe it is what it feels like to take a wonderful breath like air.
And this is what people who have near-death experiences, I listen to a lot of interviews of people that have gone to the other side and come back into their bodies. And this is what they all describe is it was so blissful that it was difficult to come back into the body and be in this container again. And but they knew that they had a purpose still to come back and they wanted to fulfill things. Yeah. So, so I guess we're kind of coming around to this where we talk about first there is no death, but then people have near-death experiences and they leave the body and they come back into the body. And that there might be what you indicated earlier, agreements that we came in with, spiritual agreements before we came into our bodies.
Mhm.
And is there something that you can say about that topic, about agreements before?
Well, I believe everything is a holy agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And John Mundy, who is one of my great teachers, who some of you might come across in your travels, he told a wonderful story the other day about this couple that had a second child. The first child was like 3 years old or something, and the second child was born. And parents are sometimes worried about what the older child will do with the younger child. And so they kind of watchful about it. And so he was telling this story about this little girl said to her parents, I would like to see the baby by myself, please. And the parents said, oh no. But they said, oh, okay, because they had this baby camera in the room and they thought, well, we can watch and make sure the baby's okay. And so the little girl goes up to the crib and she says to the baby, tell me about God again. I'm beginning to forget.
Sweet, sweet.
So how many children have come into this world with this sense of knowing how ethereal they are, and then we shut them down. They come in with this not being prejudiced and not eating from the garden, that apple of good and evil, of judgment, right? And then we begin to teach them that if you're not like the rest of our tribe, you're not going to be safe. And thank God I'm a renegade and I hang out with all these renegades who gave up safety because what the tribe taught was not good enough for them
Yeah.
to be able to flourish. And I've been reading about behavioral psychology, talking that it has a lot to do with what your birth form was, whether you were a first child or a second child or a third child, what is acceptable to you or not. Because the first child is very often pampered and taken care of and rewarded for being like the parents and more conservative. And the second child says, there's no room for me in that. And so tends to be a bit of a renegade. So can you guess which number child I might have?
I guess we know.
And then because you are observing society as an outsider and not feeling like you fit in, you have to begin to find a place for yourself. That's true. That makes me breathe. A place for yourself where you belong. And so my circumstances led me to find that I belonged to something that was greater than this societal container that wanted to tell me how to think, and that I used to observe and say, I hear what they're saying and I'm watching what they're doing, and it doesn't jive for me. So I had to find a place where I could find some comfort for myself. And that's what happens to children very often that have had early losses in their life, is they go to the spirit, to something that they can trust or connect to, because they cannot connect to people on earth. And so it lends, that they could possibly lose, and it leads them to this exploration. And so I was 5, 6 years old looking for this God that I would belong to and thinking, this is not it, this is not it, this is not it. And so, was that the spirit that just popped in and lit up your face, I think? So, so that happened to be why my journey was my journey, so that I would be able to be who I was.
So not long ago, my father passed, and I really felt the part about missing him physically here, and the routine and having him in his usual chair and that whole thing. It was really a sadness and a grief that I went through about missing him being here. And yet with Paul Lowe, that has not happened. And so maybe just can we talk a little bit about the mindset and what the mind does with it, and what's the potential of really being in tune with death?
Well, your father and you had a different relationship. Polo was a teacher.
Yeah.
Your father's somebody that grew up with you. It's a part of you. And you don't go through an amputation without bleeding, someone once told me.
Mhm.
It's a limb, it's a part of you physically that you were with for how many years? We don't want to know.
Hmm. We don't want to know.
We don't want to know. But it's a loss of that physicality.
Mhm.
You know, if I were to lose an arm, it would feel like that arm was there but missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really, very, very nice way to describe it. And I like that we discussed that there is a way to connect to those who have left their bodies, that there is a very high possibility to do that. And
All you have to do is to want to do it.
yeah, yeah.
Have you connected with your father since he passed over?
No,
He may be resting.
he
I
might
think he'll
be.
rest for a while.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel, kind of like a presence. I might feel that from some of the people that from my family that have passed. Um, but not an actual connection where I've been able to talk with them. And I've never really asked for that either. So as you say this, that's another step for me to try out, is to see if I could actually have some good conversations.
Yeah, just be quiet and begin the conversation.
Nice,
Tell them you need them.
nice. Yeah. Well, I think it would be really interesting to have those conversations with Paul Lowe now. And like you said, include him in a YouTube video. He can
Why don't you tell us a Polo story before we end today so that we can celebrate his life?
ah, well, he had this wonderful way of teaching, and he often told stories in his teachings. So one of the stories that I remember, and I was actually telling it to my husband the other day, and he didn't understand it. So let me give it a try here and see what happens. So what he was talking about is a story where um, people have potential to be more in tune and more aware. So there was a story about a Sufi boy or young man, and he was working as a tax collector. So it was a very good job, and he made good money. And then he was one day down by the river, and in the Sufi religion, it's a green, they say a green spirit or a green man shows up. And this is telling them now, giving them guidance. So the green man says, stop doing what you're doing. Forget about your job. Take off your clothes and jump into the river. And the guy's like, I can't do that. First of all, the river is very fast and I could die. And, what about my job and how am I going to live? And the green man says, just do this. Jump into the river, forget about everything. So the young man decided to acknowledge the voice, and they were really taught when this happens that it is important to listen to it. So he did it. He jumped in the river, and it was very difficult. He was almost drowning, and he got picked out of the water by a man who was working on a ferry. So he was taking a ferry back and forth across the river and taking people on this ferry. So he pulled the guy out of the water, and he ended up living with him in his little camp by the river. And he said, look, if you would like to stay here, I'll make sure you have food and everything. And I would like you to teach me to read and write. And so the man agrees, okay, then we do this. And he loved his life so much. And he thought, how could I ever have stayed as a tax collector? This is so amazing. So then one day, after a while, the green man shows up and says, pack up your stuff. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Just pack up your clothes, whatever you've got, and start walking. So he did. So he was very sad leaving this beautiful place by the river, and he came to love the river. So he was very sad saying goodbye. And he started walking, and this farmer came along, and the farmer said, hey, you look really strong, and I'm going to the market. Would you help me? And I'll pay you some money to help me at the market today. So he says, okay. So he rode with the farmer. And when they finished the day's work, the farmer said, I have some work at my farm, and if you'd like to come and be there, I'd be happy to have you. So he says, okay. So he goes to work on the farm, and he couldn't believe how he loved being around the animals and how blissful it was there. And he was like, wow, how did I ever miss out on this before? So he lived there, but for a long time, a year. And then the green man shows up and says, walk away and go into town and start a business. And he's like, I have no idea how to start a business or what to do. I have nothing to do with this. And how do I do that? But he decided to follow, and it's been, now he knows every time he followed the guidance, it really turned out well. So he went into town and he became a businessman, and he was very, very successful, and he became very rich, and he married a beautiful woman, and he had children, and it was just a really incredible life. And he was, wow, so loving his life. And that was for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, one day, the green man shows up and says, now I need you to just walk away to the town, leave everything behind, take nothing with you other than the clothes on your back, and walk to the next town. So he was extremely sad now to give up all that he had there, but he knew he had to do that. So as he walked to the new town, they offered him a job when he arrived at a grocery store. So he was just a clerk at the grocery store. So what he noticed was that sometimes information was just coming through him now. So people would come to buy their groceries, and he would just have words of wisdom that came out for these people. And so then people started to think, wow, that's interesting. So then every time they'd come into the store, they would try to be where he was, and they would be asking him questions. And this wisdom was coming through as guidance for these people. So they realized like something is different with this person. And really it was that he just simply followed his guidance throughout his life. So at some point they said, please, would you come out this afternoon? Come onto the hillside where we can all gather and we can talk more, and you can give us words of wisdom. So he did. So he went there. And one of the questions was, how did you get like this? And the man said, like what? And that was it. It was just a natural process from following his guidance. He didn't even realize anything was really changing, although he felt good and he lived in bliss, but it just happened naturally to the point where he didn't even, when people say, how do you get like this? He doesn't recognize that there's something different. So,
Has come through him. That's a wonderful story. That's a wonderful celebration of exactly who Paul was.
yes, he totally followed that completely in his life. One of the stories he told us about his own life was there was a time when he was told by his inner guidance he did have a wife and two children. And she wanted the children and he didn't to start with. And so she convinced him to have children. And then at some point he was guided to leave. And so he said he just left everything for them and he walked away and he followed his guidance. And so really, I mean, it was very similar to the story, but we were all like, how could you? How could you leave them? And he just felt really confident and trusted his guidance that it was the right thing that he had to do. Yeah. So anyway, big decisions and uh big choices in life that come along for all of us.
And he is so magnificent in listening. And probably this very moment too. He's listening now. And so we want to say thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Paul, for guiding all of us. And we hope now we get a different kind of guidance from him. Yeah. Thank you, Ellyn, for this beautiful conversation and for being willing to delve into this topic and for all of your words of wisdom. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you for opening the pathway for this and for allowing me to make this journey meaningful in this way. And hopefully somebody will hear it and know that this was what it is and what it was always just supposed to be. So Blessings, and we'll see you soon again. And know that every path is exactly the right path.
Yeah. And trust it.
Good night now.
Thank you. Take care.